Welcome back to the Crafted Conversation, where it's a privilege to be joined all the way from New Zealand today by Dr. Craig Harrison. Craig is an expert in youth athlete development. That's where his research background and his doctorate comes from. And I'm sure we'll be able to talk a lot about his research and how he's now using that to implement those learnings and that academic piece out in the real world. Craig's lens is very much one of the development of the youth athlete in a holistic manner. So where we have many colleagues out there doing brilliant work around the physical development of young people in their peak height velocity, pre-teen, teenage years, drawing on the great work of long-term athlete development, etc. Craig's work is unique in the sense that he has a lens that covers the psychosocial as well as the physical development. And that's where I find his work in the True Athlete Project really interesting and unique, to be honest, in the space. And it's through that I'd be really interested to explore his experiences and share them with you today, listeners. So, Craig, great to have you on. Thanks for being with us.
Kia ora, Marcus. It's nice to be here.
So, as listeners know, and as you know in advance, my first question is always the same. What do you consider your craft to be?
That is a great question, and one that has changed for me over time. I cut my teeth in the gym, and it very much was about movement and the physical side of development. Prior to that, some time in HP as well. And so that's where I really earned my stripes, and I was most interested in bigger, faster, stronger coming out of my master's degree. And so that was really, so some time thinking about how we can help young athletes to develop their physical game and increase performance and defend against injury, all that good stuff. And a lot of the work of some of the guys over your way around the physical development model, and there's some really cool stuff there. But over the last 10 years probably, as you mentioned, I've branched out into more of a holistic approach, and that was through some real on the ground learnings in an LTAD program I ran over here for a decade. And so my craft now, if I was to describe it, is very much about the person and trying to figure out what it is that they need in a really complex ecosystem. And so thinking about that and supporting the athlete from a holistic point of view, performance, life, health, all of those really important pieces that come together. And so it's everything off the field. It's those pieces of the puzzle that come together and allow, the footballer or the tennis player or the ski racer or the snowboarder an opportunity to show up and put their best foot forward and just have a crack at it, really. So the craft, people, I think is probably where it lies.
Yeah, that's a wonderful preamble to a really simple captured answer, that the craft is people. So tell me then, you mentioned that you spent 10 years running an LTAD, long-term athlete development for listeners program down there in New Zealand. What was it that occurred during that decade that led to this change in your professional lens, if you like, that made you draw upon more of the psychosocial, emotional, as well as the physical development?
I think that's a great question and something I reflect on a lot. Lots of water went under the bridge over that 10 years. And, there were pain points that we were experiencing. There were kids that would come into our program and didn't stick around for very long. And we asked the question, what was it about our environment that led to that? There were changes from a societal point of view around movement skill competency. So kids coming in that weren't as competent in the final years of the program compared to the start. There was changes in how they showed up in their curiosity and their interest and their ability to get stuck in and do the work. And so all of those pieces sort of came together. And then I was exposed to some really different thinking throughout that time. And I credit my boss, actually, Mike Stanley, and I've given him props before because the opportunity for me was to really explore some edges of what we were doing, and I was on a really long leash. So I look back on my 10 years that I spent there. It was sort of from 25 through to 35, and I had so much opportunity just to ask the question why. And I think I wasn't so wound up in that day-to-day, that busyness, that it's really easy to get stuck into. And so we had opportunity to go and explore and to try new things and to ask questions of really interesting people all over the world. I started a podcast 2016, so I got opportunity to talk to anyone really who I emailed and asked for a piece of their time. And so lots of things happened and really came together to allow me to go, hey, it's bigger than just movement. It's bigger than just the physical piece. We really have to, consider that in the ecological system of learning and of development and growth and of young people.
Yeah. Is there a hierarchy, or does that hierarchy shift?
I think the hierarchy for me is people first. And so if you think about all of those pieces that come together, the environment for me is number one, and that is how people interact, the sociology, and then there's thoughts and there's feelings that are going on before they even step into the room. There's past experiences that young people bring to any sort of learning environment, and so it was starting to think about those, and then how they interact amongst other young people and coaches and people that bring agendas to the floor, all of those things. And so I don't think I think in a hierarchy, but it's just multiple pieces that are coming together in that ecology, like as you would see in any really healthy ecology, that everything's important. And it's that ability to break it down and understand it and draw on some of the science, but most importantly build it back up into the complexity that it deserves, because that's people are complex, and we need to treat them as such.
Yeah. And you talk about sort of complexity within the ecology of the development of that athlete. I would observe, and if you could perhaps clarify then, that considers things like the development of mental resilience, parental understanding, coach education around more than just the X's and O's and skill development, some sort of metacognitive piece for the young athlete, metacognitive being essentially self-awareness, their ability to assess themselves fairly in a world where unfair assessment, they're surrounded by unfair assessment in their pocket constantly, and they're teenagers, so their prefrontal cortex isn't fully online and they can't fully judge those things. As I'm saying that, and I can see you nodding along in agreement, that complexity it's significant. So where does one start with all that?
I think one starts with questioning and listening and really trying to seek to understand before making assumptions around what might be right, and what the program might look like and what needs to come first and all of those things. And so I think that's the big change that you'd see in my practice now, is it's really important to understand all of those things, be it the family unit that the young person is coming from, which we know impacts their psychology, the genetics that they were endowed with. I mean, that's always interesting. The past experiences that they've had in sport and beyond, development, what is happening at the different stages of development, and thinking about what we know. And you mentioned a couple just before around what happens with the brain and how it develops and what happens with the body, the really sensitive period of early adolescence. So it's trying to hold all of those things, in balance, and then start to make some decisions around your practice. And so there needs to be lots of discovery that happens up front. And I think that's probably where a lot of us go wrong is we think we know, and we think we can implement something that has worked in the past with other athletes before we really try and understand the individual standing in front of us. So I think that's where you start. You start with really trying to understand who it is that you're trying to serve.
Yeah, I think that's such an important and underutilized fact of building rapport in general, be it teenagers on a sports field, be it those learners in my classroom at school, or adults in their professional spaces, etc. To feel seen and heard is the first piece of safety, psychological safety, whatever you want to call it, that's going to allow that our humanistic individualism to come out. And so I wonder where you consider your impact to be greatest. Is it in there with that athlete? Is it with the coach of that athlete? Or is it at a more of a systems level in coach education? But where do you think you become most impactful?
I like to hang out with people. And so those people can show up in all of those environments. I love spending time with young people. And I still do that to this day. I've got a small group of young people that I mentor and help. And for them, it's more about expanding their thinking and, bringing some of these pieces of development that we know are important, be it in the gym or be it around self-awareness or developing some of their mental tools. And so there's that piece. More and more my work is now with coaches, and I think it's important from a coaching point of view as the designers of the environment that we start to have these conversations. And so I work a lot with coaches now. And then there's a little bit of work that I do around the system as well. So what does that developmental system look like, and how can we shape that in a way that allows us to meet the needs of young people more appropriately? But fundamentally, even the system needs to be delivered by a person. So be it, the coach, first and foremost, the parent. I love sitting with parents as well and having those conversations. And so I still do a lot of that as well. So yeah, all of the above. And I think that's what keeps it interesting for me, is to be able to jump in and out of those different environments with different people, but also that provides a lot of learning. And so when you have conversations with all of those different people, you develop a wide-ranging perspective. And I think that's, the powerful piece that I bring is if you can understand what's happening at home from the parent's point of view, what's happening, at practice and in the games from the coaching point of view, and what's happening at the sporting organization level, then you can really help the young person to understand that. And with understanding comes options. And I think that's what we need to give our young people more of, is the ability to make sense of their experiences and have options, so they don't feel like there's only one thing that they can do, because that's the story they've been told.
Yeah. And that comes back to what you're describing there, is that self-awareness piece for them, isn't it? It's like a greater knowledge in general and a greater understanding of the fact that they're seen for more than just their physical ability on the field, on the tennis court, on the track, whatever. Then that gives them the grounding and the self-awareness to have a greater perspective and almost act as a cheat code to their own neurology. Is that fair?
Yeah, I don't think it necessarily hacks the system at all. I think, as young people still have to go through it. And I've seen that over and over again. It doesn't matter how much work we can do in the gym or how much conversations we have about pressure and expectation. Ultimately, there's still times when these young people are going to go through those experiences, and I think that's really healthy. I think they all need to experience those challenges, but I think the power is in the ability to make sense of those experiences and then make good decisions off the back of it. And I think that's the difference. And any young person, if they've got people in their corner that can help them to make sense of those experiences without telling them what to do or being really directive, then that's really empowering. And I think that makes a big difference.
I think that you mentioned earlier, and to draw back to it, that listening to understand versus listening to deject, impose your own ideologies, values. That's a really difficult thing to achieve in general, but add in the fact that you're a parent and that you're just desperate for this young person to succeed and achieve the things that you think they want to achieve, that they tell you they want to achieve. That's a very bite the lip moment, I think, for a parent. And interestingly, before we started recording, you kind of mentioned that you're delving into this world now as a parent as well as an academic and a consultant. What's your experience? How often are you biting your lip?
Yeah, all of the time. The story is the same as I experience things with my kids, where I reflect afterwards and think about a million different ways of how things might have gone better if I'd done things differently. And so, it doesn't matter how much study you do or how much you work in the industry. When it comes to your own kids, I think you have to go through all of these moments with them. But then again, like I have a good practice of reflection, and we have a really strong conversation, my wife and I, around these experiences. And so I think we reflect on those and then we try and do better the next time. But yeah, it's hard. Like, parenting is hard, and I think, if nothing else, it's given me some empathy for when I'm out there working with parents. And one thing I have learned is that I don't think it's my place to necessarily tell people what to value and how to go about their parenting. I think it's now, it used to be that way, but I've learned that sharing some stories and letting parents make their own decisions based off having more information in their hands is ultimately what we should be thinking about doing. Because everybody's come from different places and with different experiences and want different things, and that's okay. That's what makes the world a colourful place to be.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of phrasing it. You mentioned the kind of providing a story there, and I love that you've used the word story and not anecdote, or it draws out so much more emotion and so much more feeling, because we're storied animals. That's my academic background. I love story, narrative, and its power in society. Is the concept of a true athlete essentially a narrative thread?
Tell me more, Mark, because I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, in the sense of it, I see true athlete, and I think by inserting the word true, I'm just wondering how cognizant you were around the development of the project and naming the project, because it just, the word true somehow draws something out of me emotionally in a way that other words wouldn't. And so I wonder, do you have a kind of storied sense of what the true athlete looks like, sounds like, is surrounded by, and therefore that informs your work or the messaging that you're trying to offer these young people, coaches, parents, etc.?
I think about trying to help a young person to find who they are and bring that forward into their sporting experience. I think we're living in a world where social media and the flow of information is coming at young people so fast that it's really easy to wear the mask. It's easy to be something else, and not get an opportunity to figure out who they are and how they can bring themselves into the sporting environment. Because I think that, like, to be the best that you can be, you really need to understand who you are and show up as that person. And a lot of the work I do now is about trying to help people to figure out who that is, because when they can show up as that true self, then they're more likely to play in a way that ends up in helping their performance, and is stronger when they face struggle. But that's a hard thing to do, right? Like, adolescence, the reason adolescence exists is to go and figure out exactly that. You're supposed to try lots of things. You're supposed to make lots of mistakes. You're supposed to hang out in places that aren't meant for you. That's just the way it's supposed to be. And I think if we look to sport and how it's changed over the last 20 years, we are imposing stories onto kids really early, and their brains are conditioned to pick those stories up, and if we're not careful, they run with those, and then all of a sudden, perhaps one day they wake up and realize that story doesn't fit them. And so, yeah, creating space to allow exploration of their own story is really important.
This is a brief pause in today's crafted conversation to talk about how the crafted concept, the overarching business that supports the crafted conversation, both in newsletter and in podcast form, can best support you in your performance environments. The crafted concept has experience working in the education and elite sports sectors through performance coaching for individuals or for teams, the learning environment, by focusing on those three pillars of the crafted concept of performance: learning environment, learning design, and learning critique. Contact me directly because I can help you, as I have done on many occasions, developing a sense of cohesion within the team. Performance coaching aims to drive individuals and teams to excel. And as a performance coach, I am an expert in areas of teaching and learning, instructional design, motivational psychology, team development, performance culture and environment, and performance mindset. It's my job to generate activities, use questioning, listening, observing, probing techniques to deliberately seek feedback and present opportunities for lateral thinking and inspire growth and ideas for you as an individual or for the performance of the team and the collective. The crafted concept is your accountability partner, is your critical observer. I'm able to draw upon experiences as an expert teacher and instructor, and as an expertly qualified executive coach, performance coach with over 100 hours worth of coaching experience. As a coach developer in elite sport, I can support and guide coaches through the complexities of your professional development, of your professional environment, offering structure and assisting you in refining your skills through learning environment, learning design, and learning critique. Contact me directly, marcus@thecraftedconcept.co.uk, or look me up on LinkedIn, Marcus Sharrod. It's a really powerful response, and I think at the center, that idea that a young athlete, a teenage athlete, that exploration phase that they're in is something that we have to honor. And I think I use that word deliberately. We have to honor the transition as a human being that adolescence phase provides. I actually, I introduced that question through story, and I've got a kind of a thread to this. I don't know if you followed Wimbledon. Do you follow tennis? Have you followed Wimbledon over the last couple of weeks while it's on?
Oh, I do enjoy tennis, but no, I haven't caught up this year with the comp.
There's a guy playing today. I mean, it'll be overnight for you, but there's a guy playing today, Ben Shelton. He's an American tennis player. I think he's 10th seed. He's playing. I think he plays Djokovic today in the quarterfinal. And I had a dispute with my wife at home. We were watching the tennis. He wears a vest. So he's playing Wimbledon wearing a vest. I'll see if I can find a photo for you, and you can kind of. This isn't him at Wimbledon, but essentially this is the kind of attire we're talking about.
Okay.
So he's a youngster. I think he's 20 years old, something like that. And he's living his best life on the tour. He's playing a Wimbledon quarterfinal. Guy's got a vest on. He's got his whites on for Wimbledon, vest, arms out, guns looking great. And my wife said, she's a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to tennis. He shouldn't be wearing that at Wimbledon. She said he should be wearing a t-shirt the same as everybody else. And it just inspired this really curious conversation between my wife and I, where I said, well, they obviously feel it's fine for him to wear it, otherwise he wouldn't be wearing it. Is he just expressing himself? And she's like, no, it's not how it should be. You wouldn't have seen that. Federer would never have done that. And I said, well, Nadal used to do it. He didn't do it. He may have done it at Wimbledon, in fact. So it just, it kind of drew out quite an interesting conversation around that expression of self. And no doubt he feels that being able to do that puts him in a more comfortable space to be himself.
Yeah.
And how does that show up? Sorry, go on.
Things have changed, haven't they? I think in many sports now, there is more space to show up and to self-express, and most importantly, to try some things that perhaps in the moment, are part of who you are. But oftentimes those things move, don't they? And just an ability to show up as something and see how the world responds, and then perhaps keep it or perhaps move on to something else is I think what all young people need to go through. But then if you think about the highlight reels of Instagram and TikTok and all of the editing that's going on with young people these days, and by the way, not just young people, I think there's plenty of adults, including myself at times, that fall into this trap of being somebody that they're not. It's a real challenge, and so I think what we need to think more deeply about is how do we create space where we can have honest conversations about who people are and help them to really express in that way. But yeah, I mean, tennis, it's a great argument. You definitely wouldn't have seen it a generation ago, but the world's moving on, isn't it? And it's just, that's how it is.
The world is moving on, and yet I find myself reflecting when you talk about things like this, an expression of individualism and being able to kind of show up with an identity that is just respected and appreciated by everyone without judgment. But if we take sport, some of the biggest kind of examples from even the 90s. So take the 90s, a far more traditional time than we live in right now. And team sports like football, like rugby, etc., were very driven by an autocratic figure, and you followed the rules. And yet Eric Cantona, UK ex-Manchester United player, total maverick, total individual. Dennis Rodman in the Bulls thrived under Phil Jackson because he was allowed to express himself and be what he wanted to be. Who was the fly half for the Aussies? Quade Cooper, was it?
Quade Cooper, yeah.
Yeah, total these individuals, and yet they're the ones that we can draw to mind from an era prior to this, that generation prior. I just find that interesting that actually you don't have to go far to find examples of athletes who were already doing that. And I just think it's nice that now, rather than being outliers, we're saying you can show up and be what you be and express yourself how you want to be.
And alongside that, I think there is also a responsibility to show up and contribute, to like be a part of the group. And so it's not one or the other, it's both. And lots of my work at the minute is thinking about leadership and what that means for young people, and as adults in the room, how we can, support that evolution. And the way I see it is helping people to understand themselves and most importantly, identify the things that they're great at, to find their superpowers and be able to leverage those superpowers, but not at the expense of the group. So there needs to be a piece where we understand what it means to belong and the belief systems that facilitate the vision that we have of the group, and then making sure that that young person can slide into that group in a way that's true to themselves, but not at the expense of the group. And I think you do see that, you see the individual who express themselves in a way where, some of the other people in those environments are compromised or belittled. And so, and that I don't think that that's something we should be encouraging either. So, as we know, people are complex, aren't they? And we need to we need to think about all of these things and how they work together.
Yeah, and actually, you've gone on to part answer the question that I next wanted to ask, which is essentially how do you accommodate this positive acceptance and a sense of safety, if you like, for all individuals within a team structure? So I think, you know, we've seen examples of this for a long time in individual sports. So your 100-meter athletes, we can name many examples. Flojo, you know, the way Usain Bolt was prior to that. Many American sprinters who turn up and are demonstrating that, look, this is me being who I am. Noah Lyles does it now. But in a team sport, less so, because for a team to function, it can't have faulty processes. And so we actually all have to ascribe to something. So what does that look like? How does a coach approach that?
Well, I think from a coaching point of view, it starts by listening and by, again, I go back to that idea of seeking to understand, you know, the other person's perspective and their reality. And I was talking to a young freeride skier just the other day, and there was a conversation that she'd had with a coach, and she believed that one thing was happening, and the coach went forth and did something else. And you know, like, these things happen, but usually because we don't take the time to actually have a conversation, really try and understand the perspective of somebody else. And when we're living in a world like sport where everything's happening really quickly, I think oftentimes those moments where we can just sit and go, I wonder how this is showing up for them, like, those moments disappear. And so I think we need to go back to that, as just being able to build time into our week where we can sit and think about our actions and how they affect others, rather than just sort of moving on to the next thing. And that's really tricky because coaches are busy. I mean, one thing I know, they're super busy, just like teachers, right? So we need to design systems that allow people to be more reflective and be more interested in understanding others, and then it's easier to make decisions that work for us all, just because we're holding that perspective in more balance.
Should coaches seriously consider offsetting time on the grass, out on the field, on the track, to allow for more of this work? Because we only have a finite amount of time with our athletes.
Yeah, we do, and this makes it really difficult. But I love the work of Michael Gervais, and I've followed him for a long time. And he talks about there being three things that develop awareness, which is really what we're talking about. The first being mindfulness, the second being, you know, just taking some time to write your thoughts down, a journaling process, and the third being being around wise people. And I think, you know, every coach should at least have one of those mechanisms in their world where they are spending some time with their own thoughts or spending some time with someone that can ask them questions to reframe how they might have seen it, just to widen their perspective. So I think that is the piece that really helps coaches to grow, is to have that time where you're working on making things better, not just making things happen.
How important is mentorship?
Well, for me, it's critical, and I think it shows up in lots of different ways. You know, for me, mentorship is just having someone that has enough experiences in your world to be able to ask you questions, but not necessarily someone that really knows the craft deeply, because I think sometimes you can bring biases in if you know it too deeply. And so, you know, it's really important for coaches. I think it's important for young people these days. That mentorship might be an older athlete who's just been through the same experience as a couple of years previously. I'm a big fan of just peer learning, where and this was an idea in education long time ago, but long before we decided that we were going to split up or group kids just by the same chronological ages. But it shows up in places like the skate park, which I talk about a lot, where the 16-year-old mentors the 14-year-old, and the 14-year-old mentors the 12-year-old, and so on and so on. And that's, for me, is how it shows up. And so you don't need to necessarily have a mentor, but I think mentoring as a verb needs to show up everywhere.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I like that. Mentoring as a verb needs to show up everywhere. And that is that not, does that not capture what adolescence is? In its essence, it certainly captures my adolescence. You go out, you play in the street, you're around loads of kids that are similar age. Like, this isn't just a romanticized kind of all the good old days. That is how I lived my childhood and my adolescence.
Yeah.
You go out, you play football. For us, football was a language. You play with older kids. That's what happened. Does that not happen anymore? And therefore, do we have to cultivate that? Do we have to create that within a club environment, for example, rather than always having the under 13s and the under 14s and 15s and 16s? Do we need to deliberately create these opportunities?
I think we do. I think we do need to formalize the informality, because it's not showing up organically as much as it used to. I think there are spaces here, at least in New Zealand, where it does show up, but those spaces aren't as common as what they used to be when we were young and when our parents were young. But yeah, that there's real power in that. And my boy Isaac's into fishing, and I've got a good friend who lives in a smaller town in the middle of the North Island, where there's lots of access to the outdoors, and he knows he's a teacher, and then there's a kid at his school who is 14 years of age and just the ultimate fisherman. He goes on adventures, and he just knows so much about fishing, rivers and trout and everything that comes with it. And so what we look to do as parents, I think, is to find those opportunities where we can expose our kids to mentors that are pretty close in age and stage, but have an ability to share what they've come to understand, because I think that's really powerful. And so it's one of the ideas that I think we could think a little bit more deeply about and trying to arrange in our sporting environments.
Yeah. And amongst all of this, we've spent the majority of this conversation focusing on your sort of, let's describe them as the more emergent themes that professionally for you, that kind of framed by that experience, those 10 years that you had with your long leash, as you described it, running an LTAD program. But how important do you still find your original love, the objective, the in the gym, the movement, etc.? Like, how much of that work still shows up for you?
Yeah, what I love about that is the relationship that a young person needs to develop with the physical side of the game. And that's one thing that we learned, is that everybody that walked into our gym had a different relationship with movement. And those were influenced by all sorts of things, be it their parents and the environments they spent time in their formative years, and the people that they spent time around and what they believed about movement. We know that parents have a massive influence over their kids, and just through what they do, not necessarily what they say. And so, yeah, but it's that relationship. We know for athletes that as games change and they get faster, and the physical side is really, really important. You need to have movement skill. You need to be able to have durability. The greatest athletes turn up and train day in and day out without getting broken. And so all of those things are really important. So yeah, like it's a piece that I still go back to, and I'm still in the gym coaching kids, but I really love that the first stage of the experience where we go, how can we help a young person to fall in love with movement, to be curious around their bodies, to start understanding and asking questions, so that we can empower them to really know that this is an important piece of their development, and it needs to evolve with everything else. And so that's the piece I like. I think once you achieve that with young people, and it's never something that remains, it's constantly working. It's a constant work on. But I think then, sometimes you do just need to get into the gym and do the work. And I think that's the time where there are other people in my environments that can do that more effectively. And so, yeah, that's when I think about, okay, now I'm interested in moving, to another group or another individual and trying to help them really fall in love with movement.
From your perspective, Craig, what do our current teenage generation, I can't tell, are they still generation Gen Z, or have we moved into Gen A now? I think we're at a tipping point. We're at a tipping point. Again, something else we never used to think about. Although maybe doesn't that typify the millennial, that ultimately we're quite chilled. What are they lacking the most physically? Is it hip and ankle mobility? Is it muscular, proper resistance training, kind of muscular development around their joints? Is it, and as a result, speed and power? Is it aerobic capacity? What do you see as being the thing that this generation perhaps come into the physical environment and lack the most?
For me, it's play.
Wow. Okay.
Like if I was to think about a principle around, what supports the development of movement in a young person's formative years, the first 10 years of their lives, it's play, and it's the variability that comes with that play. And so that's what we've noticed is, you might see a young person who can lift X amount of weight in the gym, but as soon as you ask them to try and adapt to solve a new or novel movement problem, then that's where things start to fall down a little bit.
Before you continue, Craig, could you contextualize that for the listeners? Like, so say someone, I don't know, put it into an overhead press, and then what would you ask them to that, or something that you would then ask them to put in an adaptable environment?
Oh, so I'm thinking about sport itself. Like, sport is a very complex, dynamic problem, right? So if you've got a basketballer who's going up for a rebound, and they get nudged in the air, and then they have to land and control that landing safely, to control the downward motion of that land, and then they have to actually accelerate again in another direction in order to track an opponent or to follow the game. Then that's a unique movement problem that the great athletes can solve, and the science suggests that ability comes from variability in their training, and right. So if you track that right back to childhood, we point to play that allows that variability to accumulate over time. So we think about it as having a movement library. In the first 10 years, we want as many books on that movement library shelf as we can possibly, we can possibly fit. So but that's what you don't see as much, the organized sport, the early specialization, like those things that are starting to become more common, then you just don't get as much range. David Epstein talks about this in his great book, Range. And there's more and more science that backs it up. And so when we talk about early specialization, the problem is it's the variability, and obviously from a physical point of view, but it's deeper than that. But we're talking physical, so I'll just stick to that for now. And so we want to make sure that we're getting variability in movement, and what we're seeing in teenagers, if they show up as a 13 or 14-year-old, it's actually really hard to get that at that stage of development. So we can help, but the preference would have been a lot more play in their first 10 years.
You see this certainly the higher level football academies are categorized in the UK. Category 1 being your kind of like top teams, your Premier League teams, whatever. And it's I don't know, in the last 5-10 years that you'd have footballers turn up for their under 10, under 11, under 12, under 13 sessions, and what they'd be doing was essentially kind of Ninja Warrior, or kind of recreate a kind of soft play environment. And,
Yeah,
and
that's right.
a colleague of mine was involved with one of these academies and was describing it to me, and the current parental backlash, if you like, saying we turned up, we've driven after work on a Monday evening to come to training, and this is what they're doing. They're not playing football. And it's really interesting, and hats off to those that will create that semi-structured environment to kind of try and catch up the play. It's they're scary times we're in, I think, actually. For you to answer that question in that way is both beautiful and saddening at the same time. The idea that an absolute birthright to a human being in your first 10 years of life to just create a movement library, and that we're missing out on that because they're consuming Netflix and iPads, and parents are doing the same and have lost their own sense of play and ability to create that. I actually found out the other day that the BBC have got a whole page dedicated to semi-structured, unstructured play ideas for parents, and I thought, isn't that great? And then at the same time, that is so sad that the kind of license payer in the UK, the money that we pay for the BBC, they have decided that it is worthwhile to create this resource. What happened?
Yeah. Like lots of things have happened, which means that we are here. That is where the world is at. And now I think there is enough understanding and knowledge now to try and move back into, environments where we can recreate that. And it's interesting times, because when I talk to parents, or we talk to coaches, and we speak about the way it used to be in our day, the reality is the modern times are different, and there's lots of change that has happened. And so it's not about recreating what we experienced. It's about evolving and making sure that we are creating what we need to create in the current environment in order to serve our young people. And so, that's the challenge. And there's still lots of questions, like, does that need to happen at school now? What are clubs doing? Do clubs in their junior spaces need to think more about, creating the movement library instead of just teaching the game? Like, all of these things that I think are blue sky ideas, but it's going to require people to make some serious changes and have some different outcomes in mind. But ultimately, an ability to show up and have a rich movement library means that they're going to be able to perform better on the football field, or whatever the sport is, that we're trying to develop. And that's the piece, right? And that's the work we do with coaches too, is understanding that they're actually going to acquire technical skill faster if they can move well. And they're going to get injured less, so you're going to be able to train more. So, like, all of these things start to line up. And, it's great to see things that are happening in the academy system over there, where they are getting some nice variability around their movements. And, and that's something we built over here in our development program. We really went to a space where we were setting some really cool movement problems. And that's the work I do with PE teachers and coaches here still a lot. And the biggest thing that we need to work on is the muscle of creativity. Because as soon as you try and actually develop variability, then you have to be a more creative practitioner. And that's hard. And so, we spent hours down in the gym, just the coaching team, coming up with some really interesting movement problems that we could then throw at our young people. And that was super cool. Like, it brought the coaches together. It was heaps of fun. It was very playful. And
I'd love to be part of that. That sounds like a dream day's work to me. What you've described there, I'm sure you have a really similar system with your Winter Olympic sports down in New Zealand, but that athlete transfer into less popularized, less commercial sports of going, right, do you possess this foundation of skill set of abilities? Well, okay, actually it's going to be really easy to pick you up and turn you into a skeleton bobslayer, or it's going to be really easy to pick up that ability that you have as a human being and put you on a volleyball court, because ultimately the skill development is actually the final piece of the puzzle. And certainly in this country, our traditional sports, I'd be interested in your sort of rugby lens on this from a Kiwi perspective, but football in this country suffers for that big time. I get asked all the time because people know, friends and connections know that I have an elite footballing background, and they'll say, "Oh, are your kids into football yet? Are they playing football yet?" And I'm thinking, they're 7 and 6 years old. They can't even kick the ball properly. No, they're at gymnastics. They're at swimming. It's I don't know what your sense of that is.
Yeah, I think that is starting to come through in some of our sports. And I was having a conversation just the other day with a rugby league coach, and he was talking specifically about the women's game. And we see, just such amazing progress in women's sport across the board. But one thing he was talking about was what they're looking for when they ID young players. And now it's not about technical skill, it's about athleticism. Because it's actually easy to teach the techniques of the game than it is to develop a great athlete. And so I think that starts to say something about, what is, one, the priority, and two, what may be missing from a lot of the nutrition of our young people now is we a generation ago, we would just have a whole bunch of athletes that would show up. That's what you would see. It was just the way that we were. But it's not like that anymore. You have kids that show up and find it really challenging just to perform some of the fundamental movement skills. Skipping. There was a kid in the gym I was working with the other day. I just asked him to skip, and he got there, but it took him a while. And that's something that a young person should be able to see me do and imitate it with no trouble at all.
Do you know what my perspective on that is? The triple jump. When if you teach the skill of the triple jump, bearing in mind, I'm a PE teacher by trade, and my school, I'm pointing because the track's over there. They're minimum 13 years old. And actually, we're not doing triple jump until they're a bit older than that, because in this country, at least, girls, because of peak height velocity, etc., don't do triple jump until they reach year 10, which is 14, 15 years old. And the amount of children that cannot replicate that pretty simple combination of movements compared to earlier in my career is powerful stuff.
Absolutely.
We're sort of drawing to a close here, Craig, and I'm interested to ask, and again, I always ask this question, but I don't necessarily frame it to guests. What have you changed your mind on most recently?
It's interesting. This is a question that I asked my guests on the podcast.
Oh, no way. I didn't copy.
No, but I don't think I've spent a lot of time thinking about that from my own perspective. What have I changed my mind on? There's, I think it's probably more in the smaller things. Like there's constant information coming in that I seek and that I'm looking for. And could I give you a really specific example right now? I'm working on a book. It's not too far away now. And when I went from the shift from, quite compliant, structured, very heavily structured environments that I learned in my undergraduate and master's degree, and started employing in high performance sport. And then I went into working with kids and had the long leash and went on a bit of a discovery and started to be much more explorative in how we actually designed our environments. I went very much away from the compliant type of approach, and I think more recently, what I think deeply about is moments where direct instruction and compliance is actually really useful, and so there are moments where we need to take that approach, and it's really helpful. And then obviously there's others where we can overdo that. So I think, my mind is now, what is the right tool for the problem that we're trying to solve? And I think great coaching is that ability to move in and out of those different pedagogies to be able to actually support the kids that we're working with in ways that are best suited to their needs. And so that's something that I think a lot about more recently.
That's great. Really appreciate it. Craig, thanks so much for your time.